That human connection that we create on the broadcast every night is incredibly important.
We are so excited, we just can't hide it.
CBS mornings are, well, everything your morning should be.
Let's do it!
Let's go!
CBS mornings, starting at 7.
Brittney Griner is finally free after almost a year as a prisoner in Russia.
Today my family is whole, but as you all are aware, there's so many other families who are not whole.
We never forgot about Brittney. We've not forgotten about Paul Whelan.
The working class people, they, in my mind, are the persuasion vote. They are the ones that could move from a Republican column to a Democratic column.
On this vote, the yeas are 258, the nays are 169. Present 1. The motion is adopted.
Wow. This is a great day. We are sending the Respect for Marriage Act to the president's desk.
Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Thank you for joining us. Basketball star Brittney Griner now heading home as part of a prisoner swap with Russia. In exchange for Griner, the U.S. released a convicted arms dealer known as the Merchant of Death, Viktor Bout. Griner was arrested at a Moscow airport in February and charged with drug trafficking after Russian officials found vape cartridges containing oil derived from cannabis. President Biden says she is in good spirits. He also reiterated his administration's commitment to bringing home other wrongfully imprisoned Americans, including retired Marine Paul Whelan, who is still detained in Russia. For more on this story, Margaret Brennan and Ed O'Keefe join us. Margaret is CBS News' chief foreign affairs correspondent and moderator of the terrific Face the Nation. Ed is CBS News' senior White House and political correspondent. Really appreciate both of you being here. Margaret, you sat down earlier today with the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, to talk about this development. Let's listen to your interview.
It was totally unacceptable that Brittney Griner was behind bars herself. And Paul Whelan remains behind bars. And that my number one focus is on righting that wrong and ending that injustice. In the case of Viktor Bout, these are hard decisions. And ultimately, those of us working for the president make recommendations, give advice. He's the one who has to make the hard calls. And he made a hard call. Viktor Bout's been off the playing field since 2008, which is a very good thing. And he served about half of his sentence. At some point in the years to come, he was going to get out. And I'm glad at least that we were able to get Brittney Griner home.
Margaret, what's your assessment of the Secretary of State's answer to your question? And how are different constituencies here and abroad evaluating this decision?
Well, that phrase, at least, is an important one. The White House is arguing that it was left with no choice, either take this single trade or don't bring any Americans home. Russia had turned down earlier offers of a 2-for-2 swap, a 2-for-1 swap, saying no, this will only be about Brittney Griner. And Viktor Bout was very important to the Kremlin. It was the Kremlin and the White House communicating through intelligence channels, the FSB and the CIA, passing messages back and forth. In terms of what precedent this sets, that's the big question. And as we've been talking about, there is some outcry among law enforcement officials who chased Viktor Bout around the world, trying to prosecute him and put him behind bars. In fact, America fought to extradite him from Thailand so he would be here in prison. And then he was used in a trade. So there's some frustration there that this sets a dangerous precedent that shows if you capture the right famous American, you can get something, Vladimir Putin, you really do want. But as you heard the secretary say, they felt like they really did need to try to bring her home, and that was a top priority. But then it raises questions of who was left behind.
The administration, Ed, is facing questions not only from Margaret, but also from Weijia Jiang. She was at the White House today asking Karine Jean-Pierre a question. Let's hear that exchange.
Was there a risk assessment to determine
how dangerous Bout may be now that he's been released back into the world.
This was not a decision that the president made lightly. Just want to be very clear on that. We will always stay vigilant about our national security. That's something that the president will always do, and we will act swiftly to protect it. That was true yesterday, that is true today, and that will be true after Mr. Bout's release.
Ed, what's your latest reporting on this front?
They anticipated that there would be criticism like this. I think they understood at the White House and the State Department that by leaving Whelan behind and still leaving him there in Russia, there's going to be criticism and after-action review of why exactly Griner, who'd only been there for 10 months, got precedent over Whelan. But, you know, we should point out these two cases were never linked. They were completely separate incidents. Whelan has been detained now for almost 4 years on different charges in a different situation. And even the Whelan family today made very clear in its statement, as angry and as impatient as they are, justifiably, in awaiting his release, that they are different situations and they want any American freed. And that seems to be the bottom line, that there was an opportunity to get one more American released. They took it, and they will continue working to get Whelan returned. And as Margaret knows better than anybody in this building, the State Department has an office that deals with hostage affairs, that is working around the clock to free people, not only in Russia, but also in Iran, in Syria, and in other parts of the world that have been unlawfully detained. There's a handful still in Venezuela, for example. Some were released earlier this year. And it's something they're working on constantly at the White House, at the State Department, and embassies around the world.
Margaret, to build on Ed's point, you pressed the Secretary of State about what's next. What else will the United States do to deal with people who are being held by adversaries around the world? What did he say?
Well, you know, I find these hostage cases fascinating because oftentimes these are just average people who end up being used because they have one valuable thing in their back pocket, and that's a U.S. passport. And that becomes leverage. And that becomes leverage against the President of the United States. And so that is the risk here, you could argue, is this shows if you get a famous American, maybe you get even more. And so that's one of the criticisms here. I think for what Ed's point was is hugely important, having followed so many of these hostage cases, there are at least 3 Americans behind bars in Iran. Their families are absolutely desperate. One of them has been there for 7 years. You don't know their names. You know Brittney Griner's name, but she is very well known. She had a huge public push behind her. And you know what? That public pressure does make a difference. So for journalists like us, we do constantly ask about these people, like I asked the Secretary today about Imad Shargi and Siamak Namazi and Murad Tabaz, just 3 of the Americans being held in Iran. And they are stuck in a situation where it's just as difficult as things between the U.S. and Russia. The U.S. and Tehran are in a really bad spot. The nuclear talks have fallen apart. Iran's selling weapons to Russia. Getting those Americans out right now would be really tricky. And this always has, as you know, political blowback. Who do you prioritize? What do you swap? Is there a money transfer that goes alongside of this? So all of these things are the big, tough decisions the commander-in-chief has to make. But this is a big chessboard here.
Is there anything that could change the dynamic with Iran regarding the prisoners you mentioned?
Well, there's been, they insist at the White House that these are separate tracks, separate in perhaps negotiations, but they are linked. And so that is one of the concerns of the family members, that as they see the nuclear talks collapse, that means Iran will only put a higher value on the heads of their family members. And so that's why one is linked to the other in that way. They are desperate to know if there's a plan B. And how to bring those Americans home. But in other countries around the world, it's the same thing. And to the credit of Cherelle Griner and Brittney Griner's agent today, when they released a statement, they made a point to list the names of other Americans. And they've banded together to help each other get more publicity.
I saw that, the solidarity among all of those who have gone through this experience. And just, Ed, quickly, what about the Republican response to how President Biden and his administration handled this?
Well, you heard it from John Bolton. You heard it from Rick Scott. You're going to hear it from others in the coming days who've raised concern about the swap, about the idea that a convicted arms dealer and someone who had sought to kill Americans overseas was swapped for a professional basketball player with a minor drug possession charge. Was that an equal trade? We'll see how far those criticisms go. We'll also see whether it becomes perhaps part of what Republicans want to do in terms of oversight and accountability once they control the House next year. But again, I think the White House had a good sense of the potential criticism, but also the relief and the political win that this is. Let's be frank. I mean, the idea that the best-known American held hostage overseas is back, and that her wife was there this morning with the president early when it happened, and that image was seen not only across the United States but around the world, is yet another feather in a cap of a president who's on a pretty good stretch right now. And obviously, the push to get Whelan continues, but they're mighty happy at the West Wing to know that that this happened safely and successfully, and they'll press on in the case of those other Americans.
A busy day of reporting for Margaret Brennan, Ed O'Keefe, their colleagues, and their teams. We really appreciate both of you stopping by and sharing your reporting. The midterms are now officially over, and now all eyes are turning to the 2024 primaries. And Democrats have some new ideas and debates over which states will have an early say. We'll dive into the details with a high-profile former 2020 campaign manager. You're streaming Red and Blue.
Original CBS Reports documentary.
Yoga and wellness has become a place of anti-science.
Online clickbait.
The algorithms feed you content based upon your own fantasy.
Potentially at my peril.
There's no question about it.
Spreading digital disinformation.
Their entire yoga studio and spiritual community got so embedded in all of the QAnon stuff that it became this sick place.
Why pro-health people are fertile ground for anti-science messages.
We can just go into the whole mask thing. A lot of us just believe that's symbolism for silencing people.
People are locked in this mindset. They've been taught to accept what the medical doctors say.
No longer are you going to be willing to take any medical advice.
It's a big problem that we urgently need to address.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future?
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico
and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
When weather turns extreme.
States from the plains to the northeast are bracing for more than 2 feet of heavy snow.
Every second counts.
This is a monster winter storm.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
There's a wrinkle in the forecast, the accumulating ice.
Oh! You'll have time to get prepared.
Take precautions before you head out.
Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
We are so excited, we just can't hide it.
CBS mornings are, well, everything your morning should be.
Let's do it!
Let's go!
CBS mornings, starting at 7. Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Robert Costa. Last week, President Biden and the Democratic National Committee announced plans to reorder the party's presidential nominating process. The new plan would make South Carolina, instead of Iowa, the first state in the 2024 primary calendar, followed by Nevada, New Hampshire, Georgia, and then Michigan. President Biden says part of the reason for the change is to give more non-white voters a say in the nomination process. And earlier today, we discussed this with Faz Shakir, who managed the 2020 presidential campaign for Senator Bernie Sanders. Shakir is now a top advisor to the senator. Faz, we really appreciate you taking the time to stop by. You have stirred a lot in Washington in recent days, writing a New York Times op-ed article for the New York Times where you argued that the push by top Democrats, including those in the Biden White House, to move the South Carolina primary to the front of the line would be a bad move for Democrats. And the criticism of your piece in some quarters has been that black voters in South Carolina deserve a chance to have that first shot in the nominating process. So what's your case against that?
Well, certainly I applaud President Biden on behalf of his plan, quite frankly, identifies the need to move up battleground states like Michigan and Georgia and Nevada closer to the front of the line. And that makes a ton of sense, Bob, because now we're talking about states that we need to invest in for a longer period of time, talk to a lot of voters, do a lot of voter outreach. And the outreach that would occur in a primary election would be beneficial to a general election effort to try to win that state, win the presidency. So that makes a ton of sense. And if we're following that logic, it's kind of one of those kids games where you do which of the following does not fit in the category, which one does not apply. And South Carolina doesn't apply. It's not a general election battleground, and it is a deeply conservative state, not consistent with a lot of democratic values, not a pro-union state.
Let's talk real politics here. That, as you said, the chairman of the party, Jamie Harrison, from South Carolina, one of the most influential members of Congress, Jim Clyburn, from South Carolina. President Biden, not from South Carolina, but certainly his presidential campaign was given an enormous lift by the South Carolina primary. Do you believe all of those players perhaps are leaning on the scale too much to make this happen?
Yeah, of course. And we start from the proposition that South Carolina was number 4 in the primary before, and now we're moving it to the front of the line. So if you're going to argue it for moving it to the front of the line, you have to have a pretty damn good reason for it. And I have not yet heard that reason. I've heard the really good reasons for moving Nevada up, for moving Michigan up, Georgia up, for considering North Carolina, any other numbers of states make a hell of a lot of sense. I haven't heard a very valid reason for South Carolina that is unique to South Carolina. I get the pushback, you've heard it, that, oh, well, we have to honor black voices. Sure, let's honor them and heed them. There's other ways to do it in a strategic way that makes our nominee stronger and makes the whole Democratic Party stronger. So, there are obviously a lot of, angst and anger perhaps from the Biden orbit that I understand. They did well in South Carolina and they want to honor South Carolina. That's great. That's not the reason to move it to the first in line.
If President Biden decides not to run, you personally would expect Vice President Harris to think hard about getting in, probably to run, Secretary Buttigieg to think hard about running, maybe getting in. What about your longtime confidant, the person you've advised for years, Senator Bernie Sanders? If President Biden does not run, will Senator Sanders give it a hard look and potentially get in?
I assume that he would give it a hard look. I don't know that I don't want to make a judgment for him. Obviously, it would be his choice to make. But I assume that he would want to reevaluate it. My operating assumption is that, Senator Sanders, like President Biden, done this a few times. He's very aware that, he's older now, and he'd have to make a real judgment about his own vigor and his stamina and his desire and hunger and passion to do this a third time. But if it were an open field, yeah, I'm confident he would take another look at it and say, do I want to do this or not? But I also think there'd be I think it'd be a situation, again, like 2020, Bob, where you'd have a lot of people in the field. So not just 3 or 4 or 5, but probably closer to 15, 20, probably.
And would you encourage him to think hard about it and to get in? Do you believe there is a path there for a Sanders 2024 race? Regardless of his final decision, do you see a path?
Well, I certainly see a path for someone who advocates strongly for working class people. You look at the trajectory of the Democratic Party losing core constituencies of the working class people. They, in my mind, are the persuasion vote. They are the ones that could move from a Republican column to a Democratic column, could make all the difference in places like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania and other places. And the question is, who speaks to those working class people, diverse working class? We're talking white working class, black working class, Latino working class people. And certainly Senator Sanders carries immense strength with them. And I think, honestly, if we're getting in his head for a moment, my assumption would be he'd be asking, who else speaks to them? Who else could, as a Democratic nominee, do very well with those audiences? And I think, honestly, his first instinct was to say, I hope there are some other people. I'm not hungry to do this, but I will take a hard look at it if I feel that we're weak in our ability to speak to these working class individuals. And then, yeah, I think he would take a serious hard look at it. But I think he'd also want to see, are other people thinking the same way that he is, and defer first to see, I hope that there are other people who have a similar argument, desire, passion to speak particularly to working class individuals.
Are people coming to you saying, we're thinking about a Biden challenge?
No, I have not heard that personally. That's the thing. It's like I don't. If I did know any of those people, I would tell you. I have not heard anyone reach out to me and say, "Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to a challenge."
Is there any chance Senator Sanders challenges President Biden should Biden decide to run?
No, he stated that publicly. He would not challenge President Biden if he declared he wanted to run.
Faz Shakir, longtime advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, his campaign manager in 2020. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it.
Congress is making its way through a busy lame duck session, including the passage of a historic same-sex marriage bill. Coming up, we'll break down the latest developments from Capitol Hill. You're streaming Red and Blue.
Everybody wakes up in the morning and they are pelted with alerts that frighten them, news that agitates them. With this show, we have the time to explain what's going on. These migrants, they've been released. Explain the status that allows them to be released, to slow things down a little bit. What are the big sets of questions for China and its ambitions? Hackers are stepping up their attacks to extort victims. Let's start with easy. Who's attacking? Here's a deeper understanding of what's happening.
Prime Time with John Dickerson. Stream on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely. As Taiwan faces threats and aggression,
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, they are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
States from the plains to the northeast are bracing for more than 2 feet of heavy snow.
Every second counts.
This is a monster winter storm.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
There's a wrinkle in the forecast, the accumulating ice.
You'll have time to get prepared.
Take precautions before you head out.
Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
After decades in the public eye and public service, this mother-daughter duo is now talking about gutsy women. What's the gutsiest thing you've ever done? We go person to person with Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton and Chelsea Clinton.
Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
In today's Money Watch, business analyst Jill Schlesinger is here to help.
How do you even begin to make the best use of your money?
If you've got a match from your employer, don't give away that money.
Dollar Jill, y'all.
CBS Mornings, starting at 7.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Robert Costa. The U.S. House has passed legislation designed to protect same-sex and interracial marriage. The Respect for Marriage Act passed Thursday on a vote of 258 to 169, with 39 House Republicans voting in favor of the bill. It passed in the Senate last week and now heads to President Biden's desk to be signed into law. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us. Scott, thanks for being here. What's your assessment of what happened today on Capitol Hill?
Pretty striking day. 25 days until Democrats lose control of the U.S. House, Bob, and they have now sent to the president's desk this enormously important bill for the House Democratic caucus. But in fact, Democrats were joined by 39 Republicans in passing the Respect for Marriage Act today, including Liz Cheney and the number 3 U.S. House Republican, Elise Stefanik of New York. For Speaker Pelosi, it's one of her final acts as Speaker of the House. She was able to gavel this vote down. She was able to formally enroll the bill. And she told us in so many words, this is a response to the Supreme Court's controversial ruling overturning abortion rights in June. You'll recall Justice Clarence Thomas, in his opinion, opened the door, seemingly, to a review of the constitutionality of same-sex marriages. So under this new bill, the federal government is required to formally recognize marriages regardless of the couple's sex, race, or ethnicity. And Bob, I'll note this. It comes 26 years after Congress did just the opposite and prohibited federal recognition of same-sex marriages. Quite a sea change in one generation.
Scott, on the Brittney Griner front, we spoke earlier to Ed O'Keefe about some of the Republican reaction, but among both Democrats and Republicans, what is the response on Capitol Hill? You've been there talking to lawmakers.
Yeah, 2 different layers to the reaction, Bob. First of all, universal gratitude and statements of support for Brittney Griner on her safe return home, but then right down partisan lines as to the merits of the exchange, the value of the exchange made by President Biden. Let's hear first from Speaker Pelosi answering a question I asked about Republican criticism that Paul Whelan should have been included in any exchange as well.
Paul Whelan, he himself said the president did the right thing. I saw that as I was going to the floor. We are everyone is fully committed. Brittney being a basketball star, and her name was more famous to everyday Americans, but Paul Whelan is of at least equal concern to us to have his freedom. So that nobody is saying, oh, well, we just settled for this. No, he becomes even a larger priority.
Scott, you spoke to
Pelosi defending the... Go ahead, Bob. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, the Speaker Pelosi defending the deal by saying that Paul Whelan himself, in a phone interview today, said the deal was justified. But Rick Scott, perhaps the sharpest critic today, the Republican senator from Florida, saying the deal should have included Paul Whelan, that it was an error by the Biden administration and a significant one.
Earlier today, Scott, our colleague Catherine Herridge spoke with Congressman McCall. It's Ambassador McFall, as we know. Congressman McCall. She spoke with him about the wanting to be the next speaker, Kevin McCarthy. Let's listen to her interview about Kevin McCarthy of California.
Is there a scenario where a consensus candidate is put forward?
You know, we saw that, deja vu when Kevin pulled out before the conference and we had to rally behind Paul Ryan. So if on January 3rd, God forbid, we don't get a consensus, we'd have to reconvene and as a conference and figure this one out, either try to get to 218 or try to find another candidate. But I really think Kevin has it. I think he's going to be elected speaker on January 3rd.
Scott, what are you hearing about what would happen on a second ballot? In other words, for those who don't follow this every day, if there's a vote on the floor for speaker and McCarthy does not have the requisite votes to win the gavel, it would go to another ballot, another vote on the floor. How would that play out? Is there a possibility, as Catherine asked the congressman, that a consensus figure, a new person, could emerge as the next Speaker of the House?
You and I were both there the last time there was anything close to a close call, and John Boehner had to rally some last-minute votes on the floor. have some absences or some present votes to survive a challenge from the House Freedom Caucus. Eric Cantor, his number 2 then, was getting a few votes. We saw a relatively close call then. It's hard, though, to determine whether this is just fan fiction or real palace intrigue, whether there's really an alternative out there who could muster votes, and whether Republicans truly are open to the concept of not giving somebody 218 votes when clearly the Democrats are unified.
At the end of the day, you need to have the coalition. A lot of pressure on McCarthy. Scott, you'll be there covering every second of it. I know that for sure. Thanks so much for joining us here this afternoon. And before we go, a name that will be familiar to many who follow politics, legendary syndicated columnist Jules Whitcover. He is retiring, writing his last column today at the age of 95. Primarily a political columnist, he covered presidents ranging from Richard Nixon through President Joe Biden, but vividly recalls being at the kitchen in the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles when then-Senator Robert Kennedy was shot and killed. He was also one of the reporters featured in that famous book about campaigns, the classic The Boys on the Bus, about the 1972 presidential campaign. Whitcover wrote of his career today that it, quotes, leaves me, he said, with no regrets. No regrets at all for Jules Whitcover. Been reading him for years. Terrific political reporter. That does it for today. You can stream this show Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of this program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just go to cbsnews.com/redandblue.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
When folks on the right talk about socialism, it's a boogeyman.
Socialists are always going to promise you free tuition, free healthcare, free everything, but they will never promise you freedom.
I think of socialism as government control.
Wealth is too concentrated at the top right now.
Providing for people the things that they need is actually the world that we were supposed to live in.
Socialism didn't work in Cuba, North Korea, the Soviet Union.
Capitalism is the bedrock of the American dream.
My daughter's one of 40,000 people a year dying from lack of health care in this country. What kind of country am I living in that we're okay with this?
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
The Electoral College sets up a system where every vote is not equal.
The Electoral College serves a purpose and is valuable.
Electoral votes or the popular vote?
It would be more purely democratic if we got rid of the Electoral College. That sometimes simple democracy is not the best idea.
When people on both sides feel that the system is rigged, it divides us.
538 people elect the president. That violates our principles of democratic government.
The Electoral College made George Bush an illegitimate president from the beginning. It's a terrible disease on American democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more. Experience thought-provoking.
I'm open to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
If it's important to our nation.
Madam Speaker, I want to talk to you, of course, about abortion.
It's on Face the Nation.
How much money is it that you think you need to go ask Congress for?
The why behind the biggest stories.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
What are the words you would use to describe the Queen?
Kind, caring, and a nice lady.
I'm here for you. America needs drivers.
And we're here to help.
What are you learning from Girls on the Run?
Never give up and to always keep trying.
You can see fire and rescue is up. They're doing wellness checks when people are trapped inside their homes.
We're going to be okay. We're going to make it.
everyone. Welcome back to CBS News.